Okay. Thanks, Sinead. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's been a really busy few weeks for you. Do you want to tell us how it's been going so far?
Yeah, it has been an incredibly intense time. We're sort of getting towards the end of June, but less than, maybe 6 weeks ago, we're facing a completely different situation when we thought about where we were heading with the business. And in that time, we've completed an MBO, taken official ownership, and are now right in the thick of resetting what we want to achieve for the stuff business, which is a really rare opportunity. Not many businesses get to do something like that. So we're really enjoying that side of things.
I know, everybody's really excited by this news, the obviously stuff going back into local ownership, and everybody knows you and they know your management style. And I think they're very excited about the plans you've got for the business. But before we get to that bit, I just wanted to kind of take everybody on a bit of a journey and understand how you got to this point. You started off as a journalist. You have a very strong background in journalism. You then became the CEO of the business a few years ago. What kind of lessons do you think you brought from your journalism background into the management role that you now have?
Yeah, it's funny. I never ever dreamed I would follow a career path that would take me outside of editorial within media. And when I first became the chief executive, I felt then, before I started that job, that I felt really underqualified for it, because I'd come from this one side of the business that was not really a commercially driven part of the business. Your focus is not on revenue coming in the door when you're a news journalist. But what I found then, and what I find now, is that a lot of the skills that you learn as a journalist, which are mostly asking questions, being able to sift through information and try and pass it down. And also, I think most journalists carry with them an understanding that situations are never black and white. There's always grey, there's always nuance. And those kind of skills and experience, that's what's, I think, really helped me as a chief executive. And also now, hopefully, as I've become an owner of the business and starting to think about the opportunity that we have as a business to reset, decide who we want to be for the next, how many years of our history, that next era for stuff. And I think, I'm hoping that the experience as a journalist, which over many years exposes you to so many different people, their perspectives, the way their lives run, will help me as I think about how we as a business will be able to better serve New Zealanders in future.
I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but I suppose you're right. It is different going from being the CEO to being the owner. Is that something that in your mind you've kind of reconciled yourself to now?
Yeah, it was never a thought I had in my mind when I was going through the MBO process. It's really only after that as it was done. And, even the couple of weeks after that, which were really intense around things like paperwork and, setting different things up, they started to really think about that. And it has subtly shifted my perception of the business and my ability to do things there. Because for the first time ever, we don't have to formulate a strategy or a budget or think through our plans through the lens of somebody else's business, a foreign corporate, and what they want to do and what they want to achieve. Now it's really is on us. And I do feel, I think that sort of burgeoning excitement about the opportunities that being an owner and being able to specifically do things, make decisions that come with that, how that will help us move faster as a business and perhaps take some risks and try some things that we wouldn't have been able to do in previous structures.
Yeah, absolutely. The MBO, of course, came against the background of the coronavirus crisis, and New Zealand has been held up as a model of how to manage a crisis like this and being used as a great example around the world. But nevertheless, it will have had an impact. Can you just talk us through what the effect has been on the business so far?
It definitely had an impact for us and for, all media businesses to one degree or another. So what we saw was, as soon as we started to get towards that, those couple of weeks before lockdown, we started to notice a really significant impact on our advertising revenues. Firstly, in categories like travel, which was already starting to be compromised. For example, a lot of our key customers were cruise companies and companies focused on international travel. And then as soon as lockdown was called, we really just entered a situation where advertising all but disappeared. Apart from some government advertising, or there were some New Zealand businesses that kept advertising through that lockdown, I think is a sign of trying to support the media companies to do what they were doing. So on that side, we were struggling like many businesses around this, revenues falling off a cliff and trying to reset and get through the crisis of the lockdown. But on the other side, our audiences doubled overnight. We have never had more demand for the journalism that we produced. And we even saw print subscriptions going up and things like that. So it was very much a two-sided impact on the business. The work that we produced for the public was in huge demand, and actually we're still carrying through those high numbers now, while the revenue that funded that was, hopefully just temporarily disappeared.
So in the kind of medium term, do you see coronavirus as a threat to the business, or was it an opportunity to try new things?
Oh, look, again, I'd say there's both. It's certainly, the fortunes of a company like ours that relies so heavily on subscriptions and advertising are very closely tied to the wider economy. So if we face some, a protracted, significant recession, that will undoubtedly have an impact on us, and we'll have to navigate that through as it comes. It's quite early on to be able to see exactly how that's going to play out. But on the other side, in terms of an opportunity, well, firstly, it brought the opportunity for us to buy the business from Nine, who had, long, ever since they bought our previous parent, Fairfax Media, had, I think on day one when that deal was announced, they signalled then they wanted to sell New Zealand, among other businesses that weren't core to them. So when, we got to the situation where coronavirus and the lockdown had knocked our revenues for six, we worried at one stage that we might need a cash injection from Nine to help us get through, pay our staff, etc. And I knew then that would be the catalyst for them just saying, no, we're not going to commit to this business. We don't want a New Zealand business. They've got their own worries over there. The same sort of impacts were playing out across the Tasman. So when, I think that made them much more receptive to the kind of deal that I put to them, plus the fact that it became pretty evident that, the NZME process wasn't going anywhere quickly. So that was one opportunity. And now it really gives us an opportunity, and it's important that we step into this to really rethink what it is that people need from us as a media company, how we can best deliver on the things that they'll be worried about, wanting information about, needing advice about. For example, we're putting a lot of focus on the small business community and what are their specific needs and how can we meet them through content, through access to experts and advice, and through some of the new advertising products and things we can do. So there's definitely will be opportunity, and hopefully we'll be really good at recognising that and meeting it.
I read somewhere that you were quite, I don't know whether pleased is the right word, but let's use it, to come through the crisis without having to ask for that kind of cash injection. That must have given you a lot of confidence going into the MBO process.
It did. I mean, you can kind of look back now, but I think we went through a situation which I think was probably mirrored across many industries and many businesses, where we were really, really watching our cash flows very carefully, because we weren't sure how long lockdown would go on, how deep our revenue cuts would go. We had taken the wage subsidy from the government. We had asked our staff to take a voluntary temporary pay cut. And we were doing all sorts of other cost management things in the background. So we were, we got through that without needing that kind of assistance. And I think, we may not have done that without things like the wage subsidy and our staff helping us. So we're very pleased to do that, and it definitely gave us confidence that, you know, when things were very grim, we still had the wherewithal to come through. Because going into, you know, when before coronavirus hit, you know, we'd been, you know, we were traveling, expecting to make the same EBITDA this year as we had done the previous year. And that would have been a real first for us to have shallowed out the kind of years of decline and kind of start to, you know, come back into a stage where we were looking to build growth. We'd generated a lot of cash already, and that sort of helped us, you know, get through those sort of many weeks. And we'd also, coincidentally, but as it turned out quite fortunately, sold some of our ventures like Stuff Fibre and Energy Club, which, you know, the work to do that had started before Christmas. And it was just really good timing in the end that we were able to sell those and get that cash during lockdown that's sitting there should we, you know, should we've needed to use it.
It seems like all the pieces came together at just the right moment.
It felt like that, and over a period of quite, you know, those sort of, I'll say 3 or 4 weeks of just extreme roller coaster of highs and lows, you know, where you really couldn't see a day or two, you know, down the track what was going to happen, let alone start to plan out weeks, months ahead. We're really just operating with what we had in front of us, and to go through, you know, the come into the sort of crisis of coronavirus with its impact on the financial side of the business, but also, you know, the fact that it really, I think, made people aware of the value of journalism during a time like that. You know, we were an essential service, and to sort of go through that, dealing with the worry and anxiety of our own staff, what was going on in their lives, and then to have this sort of wider context around the future of our business, full stop, you know, knowing we had an owner who did not want us, and, you know, for whom we were sort of an unimportant little speck in the Southern Ocean. And, you know, it made us feel to a degree quite powerless about what our own future would be. And then we moved into the sort of MBO weeks, and that had the opposite effect. It made us feel that we could really take our destiny in our own hands and shape our own futures much more directly. So, yeah, it was, you know, I don't think I've ever experienced a sort of time like that, and probably never will again, hopefully.
We were discussing this morning, we had a call with some other folks that are on the program later about the impact of international ownership versus local ownership. Do you think that bringing stuff back into local ownership is the right direction for media in New Zealand in the future?
Look, I think it is the right direction. It's not just the fact of being owned by an overseas owner, because, you know, Nine were always very upfront about they didn't want to own a New Zealand business. They had no other interest here. But prior to that, we were owned by Fairfax Media, which is an Australian news organisation. And I would say they were very good owners for us. You know, they were very supportive. They were very focused on preserving journalism and the mastheads. That was sort of in their DNA. So it's not just the fact that you're owned by an overseas owner that can be an issue. I guess it's their intent and what support, etc., you can rely on. But I was really surprised when we did announce the MBO at the extent of the reaction from people. You know, I got probably 2,000 messages around the country. How much of that was focused on us coming back into New Zealand ownership? Where you know, we'd always operated as a New Zealand business who was owned by an overseas corporate, and that shaped our strategy and the things we would do, but it didn't shape our journalism, and it didn't impact on what we were able to, you know, to do on a day-to-day basis. So it was interesting that it did turn out to be the factor a lot of people jumped on once the MBO was completed. Yeah.
Just as an aside, we'll probably cut this bit out, but the bit that I'm going to say now, I was involved with stuff in Australia for a number of years, and we had New Zealand operations, and it always felt to me like Australian businesses sort of felt they had to do New Zealand, but they didn't really want to, and they didn't really commit to it, and that can't have been a very nice situation to be in for the.
Yeah, I think that was right, and that was probably less so with Fairfax Media because of the shape of their organisation, but very much we were always the you know, on the outside of what they would have seen as their core business, central business. And, you know, that was under Nine, you know, which is a much bigger business with lots of interests, none of which were in New Zealand. We were very much on the fringe. And from the start, they were keen to sell us. So that meant we were held in, you know, a state of limbo for over a year, where with, you know, no real investment, no ability to do anything apart from sort of freeze so that it could be out on the market in the way we were. But I think now, you know, again, there's something I've reflected on since I've taken over, the fact that we are owned by New Zealand, you know, it's a New Zealand owned business, and we're working in and for New Zealand, has opened up different kind of opportunities already, and the sorts of conversations I've had with people who want to support the work that we're doing, you know, potentially want to invest or just lend a, you know, best sounding board, all sorts of things. It's generated an enormous amount of goodwill. And I think there is part of that as a recognition. I think just with that timing around COVID, that how important the role of journalism is at a time of crisis. And a recognition that it was very precarious there for a while for us as a business. And now that we've sort of moved into local ownership, there's a definite feeling of goodwill and wanting to support us to success.
Yeah, must have been nice for everybody in the country to have a bit of good news like that after. We could do with some here. You mentioned earlier the staff and their role in helping the business survive, I guess, coronavirus through the moves that they were prepared to make. And I was really struck by one of the things you said after the deal went through, which is that you said you don't intend to keep it. And that you ultimately want to move to a staff ownership model for stuff. How do you see that working, and why is that the right move?
Yeah, so I think that was one of the things that was always on my mind as I went through the MBO was, you know, I never had any intention of being a sole owner of this business. I don't think that would be right in any context for a company that has so much reach and influence in the news. So I'd always thought I want to be able to do this and give staff a stake in the company where they, you know, can directly benefit from its success and feel that. So I'm just actually going through that process at the moment with my advisors and talking to lots of other different businesses who've got various models to try and land on the one that is right for us. So where, you know, staff can get direct benefit, and you can still leave yourself in a position where you can attract in other partners or investors should you need to do that. I thought that would be a relatively simple thing to set up, but it's actually quite a complicated process in its own right to go through. With every you know, every decision there has a lot of implications and different permutations, from everything from tax for staff or for the company to what sort of laws you become subject to, you know, things that were way outside my area of knowledge before I plunged into all this. So I am looking forward to getting to that point. We were able to sort of move, you know, I view this stage as a transitionary ownership, sole ownership, into something that's much more settled, and where the people who work in the business can, you know, feel they are really working for a benefit for themselves, rather than, you know, things going off overseas.
Yeah, that relates also, I guess, to your leadership style and the way you want to manage the business. I've heard you described as kind and respectful, but also assured. I mean, is that what you're striving for in the way you manage the business? How would you describe it?
I'd be very happy to be described in those terms. Yeah, look, I think I've probably become more assured over the years, as people do when they get more experienced and knowledgeable about their business. But I you know, perhaps it's that side experience as a reporter and a journalist sort of coming through as well, where you think, you know, you just see so many different facets of life and the things that people are going through, and there's never just sort of one side to a story. So, you know, I hope that translates through in the way that I deal with our own people and the example of leadership I set. I really believe in trying to be as transparent and upfront with everybody as possible. It's actually a much easier way to operate. That's again one of the freedoms that being not part of another listed company opens up, is the ability to talk differently about the financial metrics, all sorts of things to your staff, instead of always trying to think about what you don't say or what you can't say. And the way I look at it is that everyone who works for us, they've entrusted their livelihoods to us and to, you know, the success of our strategy or my management style or whatever it is. You know, they put a lot into that, and they deserve to be treated like adults and have as much information as there is to share.
It's a very refreshing attitude, and one I think a lot of our other companies in the sector could do with. On a kind of related note, you've put now an appeal for donations on the Stuff homepage from the local community, and you're using the kind of the power of the fact that you've returned to local ownership as a motivation. You mentioned you'd got all these messages of support from people. Is that strategy working? Are people showing their gratitude in the form of the kind of philanthropic approach that you're asking for?
Yeah, so we launched that maybe midway through lockdown. I'm trying to think, I can't think the exact date now, but it was something that had been in the works for quite a few months before that, as we started to think about, you know, like all media businesses, you need to think about how you're going to earn revenue from your readers when advertising is becoming a much more fragmented, source of revenue. And there were different paths you can follow, and we elected to go with the model that The Guardian has sort of set out, where you ask people to contribute to support the journalism that they value, versus putting up a hard paywall that, you know, forces people to pay to get to the next stage for something they want to see. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with that approach either. We just decided that we would at least initially try asking people to contribute if they valued the work. And it was probably reasonably lucky timing that kind of also came up to the point where we were in the COVID lockdown. And it brought a specific lens over what people valued from our work. And so we didn't have a budget target or know what to expect from that at all. In fact, our expectations are probably really low, but they've been exceeded, definitely. You know, we've been really struck by not just the number of people who want to contribute, but how many of them want to do monthly contributions. And I think in our previous modelling, so, you know, where we've looked at overseas, you know, the trends on paywalls and how many people can convert and what you could expect. I think it's a really comparable, you know, the comparable numbers there. So we will pursue that for the foreseeable. Whether it's something that becomes a long-term sustainable reader revenue model for us, I can't say at the moment. But it does sort of fit. It feels like it fits with Stuff and how we view who we are and our role in New Zealand. And you know, there is messaging there about local hands. I think that's probably going to change in the next sort of week or so. It was you know, it wasn't what we first started out with in that messaging. It'll probably be the marketing teams tried something for a few weeks, and then we'll, you know, I think what we really want people to do is reflect on the value of journalism, to understand that it needs to be funded, and to want to contribute to that, and possibly to, you know, to think about making a contribution keeps that work accessible for other people who might not be able to afford to do that, so afford to sort of sign up for something.
So do you think you think that consumers understand that they have to pay for content now? I mean, this is a kind of a goal that the industry has had for a long time.
Yeah.
We all know that we shot ourselves in the foot in the early days, giving everything away for free. Are we now seeing a shift in that direction?
I think there is a shift, but I wouldn't say we're fully there. And, you know, we keep a reasonably close eye on the sorts of things people talk about us and the other media and social or in other forums. And there's not a really detailed understanding of how the news industry is funded or what it needs. but there is I think a rising tide of people understanding it does need to be funded. I think the news industry itself has got a job to do to keep, talking about what's happening in its industry and, explaining the different dynamics, but also being really strong on the value that it provides and ensuring it is delivering work that is relevant to people and that they do value. And then we can sit in an area, really strongly on our own kind of foundations, with news media here and social media over here playing a completely different role. So part of that for us is, one of the key changes we've made already is that we have abandoned using scale of audience as any kind of metric for us, and we have introduced our number one metric as being public trust and levels of trust in the work that we produce. So we're just going through all the kind of details of how you actually measure that and show that, how you signal that the work you do is trustworthy on your site or in your papers. And then behind that, we'll be focusing more on engagement and loyalty, and scale is still really important to us because we are the biggest domestic brand, digital brand in the country, not just news brand, any kind, just behind Facebook and Google. So that's that power of the scale and reach gives us opportunity to start to build different kind of businesses, new revenue streams off our platform stuff enably, and to try and think differently about the kind of revenue streams that could come in to support journalism.
You mentioned the big tech platforms there, Facebook and Google. Is it a frustration for you that they have such dominance of the digital advertising market?
It is a frustration for me. And on one hand, you can't argue with consumer choice, both to consume content and, people have every right to sort of buy advertising in those platforms, etc. But on the other side of it, I think there is not such a clear understanding as there could be. And again, this is back on the industry to show that we also have that scale. We have that reach. We reach all New Zealanders. Our audience, believe it or not, skews younger than Facebook on stuff. But not, it's just a sort of, and what we do. So we could, we can provide the good business outcomes that people placing advertising need. But we also produce work that is essential to a healthy society and a healthy community. And, I would like to think that we get a position where people choose to advertise with us for two reasons. One, because we deliver really effectively for them, and also because we are a company based on a strong foundation of ethics, that we deliver highly trusted work, and that we make a really positive contribution to wider society. And, I think, last year after the mosque shooting in Christchurch, I think one of the things that really disappointed me was that we had our Prime Minister leading the sort of international call from international leaders to rein in the efforts of the platforms and the social media giants to behave better. Yet they fund that behaviour by spending government advertising on Facebook, etc., etc. And that really jarred with me. I've been on a bit of a campaign to try and encourage the government to move more of its ad spending into news media, not just to us, to support that work rather than spend it on platforms that they themselves have, decried for the behaviour that they produce.
So two related questions. Firstly, would you then support efforts to regulate those tech giants better, as is happening in Europe and in the US? And secondly, how do you feel about initiatives like the Google and Facebook journalism projects, where they take the billions that they've extracted from the news industry and give us back a few pennies in the form of these millions of dollars of grants?
That probably is how I feel about them.
That we should put in your mouth.
Yeah, so I do support those efforts to regulate them, on many levels. here in New Zealand, we saw people attacking 5G towers because of the stories that were spread on Facebook about 5G causing coronavirus. You know, this sort of misinformation posing as news media often has really serious real-time effects. And I, you know, even right now we're dealing with you know, a perennial aggravation to us where some company, scammers or hackers, put stories on Facebook that pose as stuff stories, but are not, and you click through to some real, you know, God knows what dodgy site. And what really aggravates me about that is it's like whack-a-mole. We're always trying to deal with them, but that Facebook accept those things and deliver, you know, they accept money for them and publish them, and there's no consequences there. So I definitely think there has to be a, you know, I would particularly call out Facebook over Google as a company that I just don't believe seriously wants to change the way that it does things. And certainly, you know, we don't accept any of that news money from Facebook. We don't advertise ourselves on Facebook or its associated companies, because I you know, I view them as any other supplier or partner. You know, if we had any other supplier who behaved like that or who allowed that kind of activity within their business, we wouldn't do business with them. So, you know, just because they're a